Welcome to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters, where we talk about historical drama series and films as windows to the past and mirrors of the present. I'm Michon Boston.
And I'm Taquiena Boston.
We're recording both audio and video for this part of Page to Screen, our first video episode. Yes, it took us this long, 5 seasons, almost 5 years to get here. Page to Screen comes near the end of each season of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters. The books we select for summer reading and beyond are taken from the topics and sometimes also written by guests featured on the podcast, like Carole Boston Weatherford. In Season 5, we released 2 miniseries, Jane Austen Adapted and Revolution to Rights, America at 250, which is still ongoing for 2026. You'll notice this Page to Screen leans towards history reads, most from the Revolution to Rights podcast. All 7 of our Page to Screen 2026 books tell powerful stories. We don't expect you to read them all in one summer. Take your time, pick 1, 2, or more. We'll recommend some book pairings, i.e. books that complement one another and expand the historical story. And now here we are, 2026 Page to Screen books from Season 5 of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters. So we're going to start with, we start with Carole's book, Kin, Rooted in Hope. Taquiena, tell us about this book, what it's about.
Well, this is...
actually, Carole told us what it was about, but your impressions.
Yeah, well, Carole's book, Carole Boston Weatherford, the book she wrote with her son, Jeffrey Boston Weatherford, is a multi-generational story of her family's history, but also the history of the families that owned them, and also it tells the story of her family's establishment of a town and their own move towards their own independence, in a sense, as a community, as a thriving Black community. This is a narrative history written in verse. And I found the personal stories of her family very moving. The way that you learn about what it took for them to endure, ways that they were participants in the history of the country, including in the very early history of the United States. And the story of how a family passes down its stories from generation to generation. And at the same time, this book includes a very extensive, you can tell, research about the history of the region in Maryland where Carole and her family are from, and also the history of the families who came from Europe and established farms and plantations in Maryland that Carole's family worked on.
And
so
this is the first time we've had an author who did a family story. I'm thinking of Carla and
yes.
Black Gotham.
Yes. So what I find is that family history is really important backstory to American history. And so this is one of those books, and I think it's one of those books also that young readers can appreciate.
Yeah. I want to show one of the illustrations that her son, Carole's son, Jeffrey, did. It's really beautiful here, and there are many more in this book. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the pictures are gorgeous.
Yeah. So that's one of the books that we have put into our summer read list that also might be something that a family might be able to read together and also be inspired to find out what are the stories of your family. You may not be able to go as far back in history as the Carole and Jeffrey did, but she did talk to us about the kind of research that's available that can help people find out more about their family history. Or maybe it's important just to start documenting our own history in this time, because certainly we are living through some very, very interesting times that are going to be history for future generations, and to talk to our family members who are still around who can tell us about what they remember from their families and the communities. So it's inspiring, I think, in that sense, and also a book that gives you insights into the character and the emotional aspects of generations of family.
And I want to make a note for our audience. The name Boston, since we both, all three of us have Boston in our name, we're trying to find out if that's a connection or just a coincidence.
Yeah.
So our next book is actually from our Revolution to Rights bookshelf, Divided We Stand, The Battle Over Women's Rights and Family Values That Polarized American Politics by Marjorie J. Spruill, which was a resource for the FX series Mrs. America. So if you check out our podcast, episodes 89 and 90, we have our guest is Marjorie J. Spruill talking about the history of ERA, as well as the 1977 National Women's Conference in Houston, which apparently sparked two women's movements, one pro-feminist, one anti-ERA conservative, sort of led by Phyllis Schlafly. And then there are many other familiar faces or
let's not
persons.
Forget Lottie Beth Hobbs.
Lottie Beth Hobbs. Listen to the podcast. You'll get the full story from Marjorie. So this is a book I've read. I met Marjorie when I was working on the 19th century centennial called 2020 One Woman, One Vote, because she also wrote a book about the 19th Amendment, which gave women the vote. Marjorie's book goes from the 1970s to 2016 with the presidential run of Hillary Rodham Clinton. And you definitely see where the feminist movement had momentum in the 1970s. ERA was a bipartisan thing that both sides wanted to pass. And then all of a sudden, this backlash came in from the conservative women, sort of spearheaded by Phyllis Schlafly and
Lottie Beth Hobbs.
And Lottie Beth Hobbs. We're not going to forget Lottie Beth Hobbs and Bella Abzug and Shirley Chisholm and Gloria Steinem and many, many others who are part of the women's rights movement and part of organizing these big conferences and meetings. So what you see, if you watch Mrs. America, you definitely get the complete story in Marjorie's book, Divided We Stand. And there's so little women's history that gets this kind of attention. So that's why we selected it for our page to screen books. The other part of it is that you will see why we are here where we are today. When we talk about divisions and polarization, that's in the title, it definitely will give you the story of how we got to where we are right now.
Yeah, and so it falls within our window to the past and mirror of the present, because those divisions, as Michon said, are still with us. You're also going to notice that Michon is the one who's read most of the books that we're talking about today.
Yeah, I actually have them behind me. So the next one we're going to include in our page to screen is John Adams by David McCullough. David McCullough made his name on writing about the President Harry Truman, but John Adams was, I think, a fantastic follow-up. And in fact, John Adams, in my head, had always been, well, he was the first vice president, the second president of the United States. He was a founder of the United States, et cetera, and so forth. Not very exciting. And then next thing you know, all these depictions of him as a curmudgeon, and he's, the Debbie Downer of the group. But this book definitely brings out John Adams full. And I remember reading it years ago and really loving it. I love the writing. David McCullough he didn't consider himself as a historian, but he's definitely a writer. And it's interesting to see writers take on these historical topics or biographies, because things have changed in terms of writing history now. And this John Adams book is pretty thick. I actually have my neighbor's copy here. I gave my copy away to a friend because I said, you got to read this book. It's so wonderful. And in fact, I think I enjoyed the book more, if I can say, more than the series. And we do have a Boston sister in the series who plays Crispus Attucks' mother, in the funeral scene. You'll see her in the front. That's Rose. Crispus Attucks was killed in the shooting by British soldiers in Boston, often referred to as the Boston Massacre. John Adams was the attorney defending the British soldiers, and he actually won that case. So you see his life evolve. And in many ways, I think we've become more familiar with John Adams, not just through a series or even a book, but through his wife, Abigail Adams. Wouldn't you say that?
Certainly.
At least I have.
Everyone quotes the, what did she put in a letter? Remember the ladies.
Remember the ladies.
But we'll be having a conversation with another historian, Cassandra Good, who offers us a different interpretation of what Abigail Adams meant. So that will be a podcast that's coming up. But in the meantime, the John Adams series does give you a sense of what I've learned through reading what might have been called a companionate friendship or a companionate marriage. So I would say, since I haven't read the book, but I have seen the series, that if the book allows, if the book presents that relationship as close and as equal as was possible during that historical period, because remember, in that late 18th century and for succeeding decades, women were still considered property. But you do see a really very kind of egalitarian, more egalitarian type relationship between John Adams and Abigail Adams.
Yeah, it's a really good book and good research. So I highly recommend it. And the series. Yeah. So we're going into another founding figure, Benjamin Franklin, and the book A Great Improvisation by Stacy Schiff, which was the inspiration for the Apple TV miniseries Franklin, with Michael Douglas as Benjamin Franklin. It was a bit of a stretch for me, but I worked with it. You want to talk about that book? We're both reading it now.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I had no idea how instrumental France was in the victory of the United States, or let's say in the United States attaining its independence. And a lot of it was as much about, I would say, almost intrigue and diplomacy as it was about providing arms and uniforms and the military assistance. I mean, it was a lot of deal making, and looking at how nations involve themselves in independence movements based on their interests. Because what's very interesting about the book, A Great Improvisation, is it refers to Franklin, his method of diplomacy. He was kind of like making it up as he went along. Yeah. And if you, as Michon said, people writing history now, they write it the way, you can read history now that reads like a really good novel. And this history includes spying networks and secret deals and secret meetings. And there's a lot to be learned about how important other nations were in the United States being able to attain its independence, even from the standpoint of getting Britain to accept and negotiate with the United States around the independence of the 13 colonies. So that's a good read. I'll just say that.
Yeah, it's definitely a history about diplomacy. Also, it's making me think there were just so many countries involved we thought the American Revolution was just confined between the colonies and Britain. No, I mean, there was Germany, there was France. I mean, there was
the Prussians, you had mercenaries.
Yeah, it had some extensions in India. You're wondering if World War I was perhaps maybe World War II, et cetera, and so forth. It just had such an impact. And after, I want to really enjoyed the series too. It was beautifully produced. I think there was someone from the John Adams team or writing team that was part of it.
Yes.
It's the Debbie Downer, but There it is. Read John
Well,
Adams,
you
the
have
book.
a contrast between a very pragmatic
Yeah, he was a
and the
pragmatist.
way John Adams is depicted is he's very blunt, straightforward, candid. The way Benjamin Franklin is depicted is people aren't quite sure what he's thinking. He is much more a charmer. He's sort of a celebrity when he arrives in France. And there are a lot of people who just want to be in his company.
Yeah.
And also, I had no idea how much the American fight for independence from Britain inspired other nations to rethink what it meant, what governance could look like, and self-determination. And I think what's interesting, we take a lot of our own history for granted, but when you realize that here was a nation, France, that had a king, and the United States was trying to convince France to support a revolution against a king and to create this system of government, self-governance called a republic. That was a real, what would I say?
Hail Mary moment, leap of faith.
No, not a Hail Mary. It really was very strategic,
Yeah.
negotiating, deal making, convincing relationship. So, anyway, if you like stories that are about intrigue, and I think too, when you read a history where even you know the outcome, but it's still interesting and you're still not quite sure how they're going to get to the outcome, that's really good history.
And I love the way Stacy Schiff at the top of the book, all the players in the
Yes, her
story,
cast of
she has,
characters.
yeah, cast of characters. That's the way she describes. So you get a
And you need that
description of,
list
you
to
need a,
keep track.
right. You have to go back and look for some people because there are a lot of people in the cast.
Yeah.
But just an FYI, the Apple TV series is in both French and English. So it has a French cast.
And I believe it was actually filmed in France.
Yes.
Whereas a lot of historical dramas are filmed in places like Eastern Europe. Because
Right.
of cost, of course. But I think they actually did film this one in France.
So I recommend both. I enjoyed both. I'll just say that. And also, if you want to pair it with John Adams for reading or watching the series,
Yeah,
that's our
since
recommendation.
Adams and Franklin, even though they were they had a very large age gap, they were contemporaries in terms of the work that they were doing and the times that they were influencing.
Yes. So our next book is actually a banned book in Canada, or was banned in Ontario. I was looking up that information. It's the Book of Negroes by Lawrence Hill. Taquiena, you read the book. I saw the series. It's a good series. It features Ingenue Ellis Taylor, who we've seen before in Cast by Ava DuVernay's adaptation of the book, Cast. Was it called Cast? No, Cast was the name of the book. Origins is the name of the film.
Of the film, yes.
Okay. And also King Richard, which was directed by Ronaldo Marcus Green, who has been on our podcast to talk about his Bob Marley movie. But we're talking about the Book of Negroes now by Lawrence Hill, who is in Canada. I guess he's a native of Canada, even though his parents were married here in Washington, D.C.
I also believe here's another person who may be a journalist who decided to write
yes,
a historical novel.
Yes, yes.
And it's about a woman, Aminata Diallo, who we meet when she is, I guess, an adolescent in West Africa. We see her in her own family, her village. Her mother is a midwife that she accompanies. And she is, her village is attacked. She is taken into enslavement. We follow her through the Middle Passage, how she comes to the United States, originally in the South, where she's enslaved, and eventually she is, quote unquote, purchased and ends up going to New York with her new owner. It takes you full circle from her life in the village in West Africa to her captivity, her enslavement in the United States, and her involvement in supporting the British side of the American Revolution. And because of that, the outcome of the revolution, she and other people of African descent, based on their agreement with the British, migrate to Canada. But life is not great in Canada either, so we see her migrate once again back to the creation of a colony in Africa, and eventually we find her involved in the abolition movement. Now, there are lots of other interesting things that happen in her life journey, including her life as a lover, as a wife, as a mother. And also how she uses her the skills and the education she acquires to work with the British in the American Revolution. So what's interesting is to learn about the experience of those who fought on the side of the British during the American Revolution, but also the fact that Lawrence Hill takes us full circle in this woman's life. There is actually, and I believe you can find it online, a book that is called The Book of Negroes that does document those who were, whose history follows the path of Aminata Diallo, who actually her name is the name of Lawrence Hill's daughter as well. He named for his daughter.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
That's really sweet. I'm glad you brought up that, it wasn't just a title, that the title for Lawrence Hill's book does come from something of the people who were documented to leave the colonies for Nova Scotia, I'm presuming.
Yeah.
And
hard times there too.
Yeah, it's the list. There was a list called The Book of Negroes. And as I was reading about it being a banned book, it's because of it. In the article, it says it was because of the N word, and I'm trying to figure out which N word or both N words. But I like the way you described it as a story that goes full circle, because it does, and it's a story I've always wanted to know more about those Africans in America who were fighting on the side of the British, because I think Ken Burns has kind of opened a door to that with his documentary series, American Revolution, to talk about loyalists also, and the people who got caught in the middle.
Yes.
And you get a fuller picture of all this. It just didn't happen in a vacuum or just one side against the other side.
I want to say one more thing about the Book of Negroes. Often for us, we're finding that films and series lead us to reading. I actually watched the series, The Book of Negroes, before I had the opportunity to read the novel. I had seen, I guess maybe I saw it in the library, and I decided I would watch it back in the days of DVDs, and found the story really fascinating. So then when I read Lawrence Hill's book, and I think novels and also biographies and historical narratives, they give us the backstory. They fill in the blanks. They give us more of the texture and the details that make history interesting, because a lot of history in schools gets taught as this person, this date, this event. And so I didn't find history very interesting until I was able to learn about history as a way that it was reflecting ideas and changes in society, and ways that people were, trying to create a different kind of society, or just, fulfill their own aspirations. So history is, when you can find a really good historical novel or people who write history well, it's worth the read. I'll just say that.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of which, we're moving from our Revolution to Rights bookshelf to our regular historical drama with the Boston Sisters bookshelf. And that is, I want to show this. Speaking of reading history while reading fiction, I want to recommend these annotated um, versions of Jane Austen's books. We're putting Sense and Sensibility on the list this season, for our page to screen, because we talked about the Hallmark adaptation with Vanessa Riley, who's also a novelist, and we'll get to her in just a second.
Right, she writes historical fiction. That's her thing.
That's her thing. I'm looking at my notes here. This was Jane Austen. Sense and Sensibility was Jane Austen's first published novel in 1811. There have been multiple adaptations. There's the Emma Thompson, and I'm going by the script writers, Emma Thompson film that she did. Also, Andrew Davies did another one. Everyone remembers him for his 1995 Pride and Prejudice adaptation, the saucy Jane Austen writer or screenwriter. And then there's another adaptation coming out either later this year or early next year. I think it's this year, from Focus Features, a feature film directed by Georgia Oakley and scripted by a novelist, first-time screenplay, I believe, Diana Reed. I think that's how you pronounce her name. Since I've only seen the movies, have you read this, Taquiena? This will be my first read. Okay, so you've read it. But we know it's a Riches to Rags story about the Dashwood women whose father dies because the law says you can't give your estates and your fortunes over to your daughters.
Yeah, inheritance is through the male line.
It's through the male line. Their half-brother gets everything. His wife doesn't want him to give them anything, hardly anything to live on. They have to downsize to a cottage on the Mrs. Dashwood, the mother's cousin's estate. But, as you know, the only way that women with no fortune can support themselves is through marriage. And so this really puts a damper on their marriage prospects. Nevertheless, Jane Austen believes in the power of love. I'm looking forward to reading this summer. This is definitely my summer reading. But one thing I have to say about these annotated versions, and this copy I have from Anchor Books, which is on our affiliate bookstore. Anchor Books is a division of Random House, is that if there's something like a phrase that's not familiar to you, if it's a phrase of its time or a word and how it's used, there'll be a footnote to that. And it doesn't disrupt the flow of enjoying the story. Also, if there's a carriage that you don't know what it looks like a barouche, I think a barouche shows up in a lot of Jane Austen novels, it will give you a picture. It will show you pictures of how houses, mansions, the cottages may have looked at that time. So I highly recommend these annotated copies of Jane Austen for the history, because you get both the history and the story.
And though we may mention publishers, just so you know, we don't receive any kind of sponsorship or revenue from any publishers.
Now, speaking of Vanessa Riley, who was one of our guests for our Jane Austen adapted miniseries, we have one of her historical novels, Queen of Exiles. And Taquiena, you may want to chime in on that one. I haven't finished it.
Yeah, Queen of Exiles is actually a historical novel based on the life of Marie-Louise Christophe, who was the first and only queen of Haiti. And Vanessa tells her story. It's kind of like in present day and flashback, because Marie-Louise Christophe was involved in the Haitian Revolution. Her spouse became a king, and
King Henry.
Or
Henri.
And he was trying to build alliances with European nations by, in a sense, assimilating to European style of culture, of dress. He built a palace. They dressed in the kind of finery that you would find in European society. Unfortunately, there were also a lot of political rivalries, and Henry was deposed as king, and his wife and two daughters went into exile. So that's where the term, the title, Queen of Exiles, comes from. What's fascinating about it is you also learn about Marie Louise Christophe as a woman who, in that time, we generally don't see women of African heritage who are people of means. And through Vanessa's novel, you learn about this woman, how she was navigating European society. She too was used as a voice for advancing abolition or anti-slavery. You also have her as a woman who is able to still attract men's affection and interest and respect, and a woman who's looking out for her daughters. One of her daughters is fragile health-wise, but is also artistic. And then you see her, as any mother of her status, trying to make good marriages for her daughter. And by the time I got to the end of the novel, I really felt that I had been on this journey with Marie Louise Christophe and her daughters, that I had lived through her experiences in Haiti and in Europe. There is actually a chapel where I believe she's buried.
In Italy.
Don't quote me. It's in Italy, but I can't remember if it was Pisa or another European city, but that's where she and her daughters are buried. And she helped to finance the chapel in the church there. So by the time I got to the end of the novel, I really felt that I had been through this woman's life, and I could feel her losses, but also the ways that she kept her dignity throughout all of the trials and tribulations that she lived through, and also her deep, deep love for her husband and for her children. I won't give away more, but she did have more than just the two daughters. So anyway, and Vanessa tells the story in an interesting way because she also involves someone who comes in to ask Marie Louise Christophe the story of King Henry, or King Henri. And it's my understanding that the citadel that King Henry built is one of the wonders of the world that still exists in Haiti. So you learn a lot from these authors who do that deep historical research, even for their historical fiction.
And one thing that struck me that Vanessa said when we saw her at Loyalty Books here in DC, her new novel is about pirates, a woman pirate, is that she said she does her research, she follows the money, how people spent their money, where their money came from. And I thought that was very interesting. Because that's a question we ask on this podcast. Where's the money coming from?
And it's a big part of the book of Queen of Exiles, because it is the jewels and the financial arrangements that King Henry made for his family that are part of the plot line, the storyline of Queen of Exiles, an important part of the storyline of Queen of Exiles.
Yeah. So you could pair this one with Sense and Sensibility because they're both Regency stories, Regency era stories.
They both take place in that period of history, yeah.
So our next book is one I've read and loved. It's called The Black Count by Tom Reiss, which is actually a biography of Three Musketeers, Count of Monte Cristo author Alexandre Dumas' father, General Thomas Alexandre Dumas. So this is one of those biographies you enjoy like an adventure novel. Alexandre Dumas' father was born in what we now know know as Haiti. His father was an aristocrat and an owner of a plantation there, and he had several children, including the future general by an enslaved woman named Marisa Dumas. I think she had the name Dumas. I think in the book, you go through the whole family line from the aristocratic father through his landing in Haiti, etc. And actually, his father went back to France, but the way he got there is really, really shady. He sold his young son to a ship captain or whoever owned the ship. So, in other words, his son was someone else's slave until that ship came into France, and then he bought his son back. I mean, some people may say, oh, he loved his youngest son, but what about the other children? But I won't get into that. But for some reason, he just wanted, Thomas Alexander Dumas to be raised as a gentleman under his, his custody. But, as he becomes older, young Thomas Alexander Dumas, who was a Dumas at that time, he carried his father's name. He wanted to join the military and make a career of that. And his father says, there's no way you're going to use our distinguished name and have a military career. So he said, fine, I'll just take my mother's name, Dumas. And that's how that happened. So he became a very illustrious figure in the French military through the French Revolution. He was very good friends with Napoleon until he wasn't during the campaign or French occupation in Egypt. And from there, he was, things kind of went downhill from there, which actually became the inspiration to his son, Alexander Dumas, for his novel, The Count of Monte Cristo, which we'll get to in a moment.
Maybe you should talk about The Count of Monte Cristo now, since that was his father's.
Well, yeah, that's the segue. That's the segue. So this does lead into The Count of Monte Cristo, which we did do a podcast about, and that's episode 87, and it spotlighted the new Masterpiece PBS series adaptation, which premiered this spring with Sam Claflin, who was from Daisy Jones and the Six, which was one of our Page to Screen books. I think that was in our first year. So that podcast, we called it Revenge is Bittersweet. We had Reverend Norman Allen, who's a minister and playwright, who's actually adapted The Three Musketeers for the stage, and it went up this spring, another performance of it in California. So The Count of Monte Cristo is a classic story of revenge. It starts with a young man named Edmond Dantes, who is about 19. He works on a merchant ship, and he's falsely accused and arrested and imprisoned for treason without a trial. Some people just plot and plan. They're jealous of him. They want to get rid of him, get him out of the way. I like your fiance. I want to marry her. You can't have her. I want her for myself. So they do their little plot and plan. And Edmund is thrown into a prison and just disappeared, as some people would say. So during his imprisonment, he meets a fellow prisoner who tells him about this great treasure. And they both put a plan into motion to break out, but only one lives to claim the treasure. Guess who? And that person uses it to assume a new identity known as the Count of Monte Cristo, and then exact revenge on the men who wronged him. This is one of my favorite books. I'm reading it for the second time. I haven't finished it yet either. I mean, how am I going to flip all this stuff?
We read multiple books. That's the thing.
But I tell you, yes, we read multiple books at once. But I tell you, it's great bedtime reading, just a couple pages. It was originally published as a serial. So every chapter has a hook to the next chapter, or each chapter is kind of contained within itself, its own little story, and the intrigues and the plots, etc. The series is great too. I mean, we've seen multiple versions of The Count of Monte Cristo, from the early 1970s version with Richard Chamberlain. I think I really like the Sam Claflin one as a long form version, as well as the recent one from the recent one from France was pretty good. I mean, most of them they all take their own little story. They create their own little story twist based on the characters. I mean, each one is different. But every Count of Monte Cristo has something to offer because it's such a strong story. And I just hit the microphone. That's how excited I am about it. So I'm definitely excited that we've added this to our page to screen book list. You can pair this with Queen of Exiles and the Black Count. So, or, 2 out of 3, it will give you a complete story of probably the world of Alexander Dumas, knowing that his father was born in Haiti. And Queen of Exiles, she came over to Europe. So you see more Haitians coming into Europe. She couldn't go to France, of course. She had to go to London first.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just a nice little trio we've put together.
Yeah, and we had fun with the Count of Monte Cristo because we did our first live and in-person gathering of historical drama with the Boston Sisters community with a group called Open Book Chocolates. Again, we get no income. This is not promotion. We love eating their chocolate bars. And their chocolate bars are literary inspired, and they had a Monte Cristo bar. So we had them at our event. We talked about the Count of Monte Cristo. We talked about chocolate. It was great fun. And if you also like to consume a little chocolate while you're doing your reading, we suggest Open Book Chocolates because they do some really great pairings of flavors with the novels that they choose.
And we have a bonus episode podcast with the Open Book Chocolate founders, Ari and Irene. So check that out on your favorite podcasting platform. You can find all the books mentioned in our affiliate bookstore. Look for the link on the webpage, michonbostongroup.com/Boston Sisters. We have a special bookshelf for both Page to Screen and Revolution to Rights, and also our general historical drama with the Boston Sisters bookshelf. When you purchase a book purchases support this podcast as well as independent booksellers. Subscribe to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters on your favorite podcasting platform. Also sign up for our mailing list on our webpage to get more information, updates on what's coming up in season 6 or the remaining season of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters for season 5. So we will be continuing our Revolution to Rights series. And just want to say I'm Michon Boston.
And I'm Taquiena Boston.
Thank you for listening and for watching.